In hands-on number 11, we'll cover hybrid simulation. You can use hybrid simulation if you want to simulate just a portion of traffic. And that means, based on your setup, you can let the virtual service to generate response for part of requests, but the rest of the requests can be handled by the real service. In this way, you can combine the simulated and the real traffic. And you may have a number of reasons to do that. Use case number 1. If you have a complex system, virtualizing it in its entirety can be very difficult, so you can decide to go step by step and incrementally build the virtual service covering more and more capabilities. The uncovered behavior can be handled by the real service. Use case number 2. Perhaps you don't know all the various request types that can come to the real service. So the rule is that if you switch on hybrid simulation, then the unknown request types will be automatically forwarded to the real service. So if the virtual service intercepts some traffic it doesn't recognize, it will automatically forward it to the real service. Normally, this would end up in the default response rule and some dummy values would be generated, but perhaps you prefer forwarding to the real service. Use case number 3. You integrate with some third party where testing is really expensive and you want to reduce the traffic to that test environment. And that will also be the issue we will mitigate here. Since the portfolio suggestion service team decided to outsource some of their behavior, and when we are using their test environment, significant expenses get incurred on their side and they want us to share the burden. And the mitigation is to only send a tiny portion of traffic to their test environment to drive down the cost. This exercise has just 2 steps. In the first one, we'll create a new rule called Contact the Real Service for Customer Karel only, which will make the virtual service call the real service only when the customer name is equal to Karel. And since this is a global concern, let's add this rule on the top to have the power to override everything else. I'll create a new data rule. And now let's switch the hybrid simulation on. You will find it here in the advanced simulation menu. And when you click, you will see this new request handling column and also this new control on the rules header. So this is how you can tell that the hybrid simulation is on. And at this moment, keep in mind that if we receive a request that is completely unknown to this virtual service, it will get automatically forwarded to the real service. On the other hand, if we receive something like the usual payload, we can decide what to do with it. So as usual, we'll create a row and set up a condition in it. So if the request of the virtual service is of this usual type and customer name is equal to Karel, we want to do something. We want this row to match. And let's perhaps change all the other conditions and actions here to ignore and save it. So currently we have that condition set up. But what to do with it? So in case this row matches, what we want to do is we want to drive this request handling column. And if customer name is equal to Karel, we want to set this request handling column to forward. As you can see, this control changed to all forwarded, since all the rows in this rule are now forwarded. I can change it back like this, and it's again simulate. If I click it again, this will change to forward again. So this is for bulk change. If you click it, all the rows in your rule will have this request handling column change. So let's keep it forwarded, and what will happen is simply if this row matches, the SV simulator will end up with this request handling column set to forwarding, and it will know that it needs to forward the request to the real service instead of providing the simulated response. So even with hybrid simulation, the simulated response will always be calculated, but at the end, if this request handling column has the value of forward, that simulated response will be discarded and the request will be instead forwarded to the real service. So let me test this. So for customer named John, we get the usual response. For customer named Karel, we get a different one. We get just 4 to 8 assets on output. That means we are probably communicating with the real service for customer Karel. But let me verify using the message log. Okay, I'll switch message logging on here and click send again. And now in the logged messages, you can see this special symbol where the simulation symbol, the triangle, is grayed out and there is this row crossing it. It means that the request was forwarded. And this is the response provided by the real service. And I mentioned that during simulation, the simulated response has to be constructed anyway. So let me just switch on the simulation report and go back here, press send. And now when we go back to the message log and open the simulation report, you can see how the simulated response would look like, except that you have this node here. This simulated response was generated, but in fact at the end it was discarded because the request was forwarded. So 2 things are key to hybrid simulation. First, you need to switch it on here, and then you need to work with this request handling column, a special column that shows up only for hybrid simulation. And here, never forget to set the action function here. If you keep it as ignored, then nothing will happen. If you want the value in this column to change, you need to have the set function here. The request handling flag is also available via scripting. If you type sv.response.forward to real service, you can influence by setting it to true or false, where true means that the request will get forwarded to the real service, and false means it should be simulated by the virtual service. So potentially you could also handle cases when the real service is down. You could set the flag to false and let the virtual service to simulate the response. But that's only provided that you have some monitoring already in your environment and you can check whether the real service is down, and then perhaps based on querying your monitoring from the C# rule, you can decide whether to forward or simulate. So let me comment this out and restart the service, and let's go to the dashboard and click hybrid simulation. Yeah, you can see it works as expected. And since this is the last hands-on exercise, we can also click this final check that will simply test everything we have implemented so far. So it took some time, but you can see all the features still work as expected. And if you were also able to reach this nice final result, just go to your project, export these 2 services, send us the project archive files via this email address, and you will get a certification from SVRND. Thanks for your attention, and good luck with service virtualization. Bye for now.